We are now being recorded. So I'm just going to pull up these slides here and then I'll do a share screen. And believe me, you will have some time to talk to me later if you'd like about the assignment and everything around that. So, but we'll get this out of the way first. Okay, let me pull it up here. Let me share my screen. Okay. We can all see that, yes. Interviewing techniques, tips, techniques, yes. And now I can't see what's going on in the chat, so this is your opportunity. No. So just obviously for your major assignments, and again, be advised, I can't see all of you. So if somebody has a question, just pipe in or a comment, just pipe on in, and I'm happy to take it, or I'm happy to listen, and I'm sure everybody else will be too. So interviewing tips and techniques, obviously for this major assignment, some of you might be doing email interviews, which is kind of cool too. And might have other means of contacting people, either text messages or other means, instant messaging. I do a lot of interviews on instant messaging as well, WhatsApp and such. Find sometimes people are a little bit more comfortable in that realm. So there's all kinds of ways to do it. So these are just some tips and techniques to kind of like get you through it. These are just some of the basic ones, right? Know the person that you're dealing with or the subject that you're dealing with. Have a set of prepared questions, but don't be married to them. And again, some of you all, these are just tips, right? Some of you might have your own ways of conducting interviews, and just hear these ones out because they might be helpful, right? Have a set of prepared questions, but don't be married to them. What typically I do in an interview is I'll have like a sheet of paper, like literally like this, and I'll have some points written down, not even questions, just points, right? So if I'm talking, say, to the mayor of the city, and I'm doing like a 20-minute interview over the phone, I'll write down like, rapid transit, busing scandal, and, expenses filed or something like that. And that'll tell me the 3 points that I want to touch on. But then sometimes I find when you're married to a set of questions, what can happen is you stop listening to your subject and you're just more focused on getting all these questions in, right? And sometimes the subject might say something like earth-shattering, and you may not even, you might not even hear it, or B, you'll hear it, but you won't put mind to asking a good follow-up question because of the questions you've already got written down, right? Obviously, this third point is if we're in a different world. However, there is still opportunities to do interviews in person, particularly with, I'm sure you've all seen, measures are going to start getting relaxed a little bit starting next week. So there may be some in-person opportunities to do an interview. What I would say is if you are doing an in-person interview, I'm going to tell you what the Toronto Star tells me and tells all our employees. Do it outside, right? Don't go into anybody's house. Conduct the interview outside, even if it's like, in outside of a mall or outside of like a Tim Hortons parking lot or something. I would just say do it outside. Obviously, in person, you're obviously going to get a little bit more from the person usually. Why is that? Tell me why. Why would I say that, and why do you think that might be true? Why would you get more out of someone in person as opposed to over the phone?
They're more on the spot. They don't have.
Say again, Juan. You kind of cut out there a little bit.
Sorry. Basically, like, I don't know. It sort of. I don't know. It's either they're more on the spot, so they're more. There's a bigger pressure to talk, or there's not the barrier of the screen in between you, so there's a bit more familiarity involved.
Yeah, well put. Couldn't have put it better myself. You eliminate like a screen or like a barrier, right? When you are talking to someone in person. It's a little harder for them to not be truthful with you. I mean, anybody can, you can lie in person too, right? But it's a little bit harder for them when they are looking you in the eye, or when the person is actually there in front of you, to tell a fib or to divert a question or not answer a question. So you are more likely to succeed in getting the answers that you want. Having said that, I want to be clear. We are still in a pandemic, and be careful if you're going to do that. Right, keep your distance, and be prepared to stay safe if you're going to do an interview in person. Okay. The phone interview. Okay. I would say direct the interview. Don't let your subject leave a certain issue until you fully understood it. Keep questions simple and specific. Okay. Everybody thinks that this is a stupid question, right? How did that make you feel? It's not a stupid question. Okay. It'll generate a excellent answer 9 times out of 10. They may look at you, for example, let's just say you're doing a story like some of my students did last year on the opioid crisis. One of my students interviewed the sister of a guy who OD'd and died on opioids, and he asked her, "How did that make you feel?" And he told me, she kind of looked at me like, she kind of like rose her eyebrow, kind of like, "How the f do you think that makes me feel?" But she answered the question, and she gave a really long and emotional response. So you take a little bit, right? You may get like a weird look or something like that, or even if you're doing it over the phone, you may get like a pause, but I think you'll still get a good answer, right? Um, what did that feel like? Is another good one. Approach is everything. Okay, when you're contacting people, I'm doing a story on this. Not I'd like to do a story on you. Not I'd like to do a story on this issue. I'm doing a story on this. Okay. Some of you for your FOIs, and I'm not sure if this is the investigative a story that you're going to be pursuing, but some of you in your FOIs have filed for counselor expenses, city counselors, and how much they spend in a given year, or how many council meetings they attend. If you are using, we'll use that as an example, if you are using that as a story or doing that as a story, what you'll want to do is have your information ready to go, so that when you call that counselor, or when you call his executive assistant or spokesperson or whatever, it's, we're doing a story on, the counselor only showing up at 50% of his meetings, and we'd like to get his comment. What happens when you say what's at the second part of that point? I'd like to do a story on you. What do you think that says to the subject?
That they have a choice.
Yes, that they have a choice. Well put, Jessica. And right away, their wheels start spinning, particularly if it's a controversial topic. Their wheels in their brains start spinning and saying, "Oh, you know, how can I convince them to not do a story here?"
Also,
How,
if like you don't give them, they might think that if they don't give you information, then you're not going to do the story.
Mhm. Exactly. Was that Jarrett that said that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and a great point, Jarrett. If you leave wiggle room, right, they're going to take it, especially if it means that they could get out of it, right? If you were to call and say, "I'd like to do a story on, the fact that you didn't show up to like half of the council meetings in the last year," initially, especially politicians, right? Because we all know. I'm just going to let. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to let Katrina in here. I just have to get out of the share. Okay. You all can still see the phone interview, all that stuff? Yeah? Okay. Um, if you are saying it in that way, I'd like to do a story on, you only showing up to half your council meetings. Right away, they're going to start to spin, right? Especially being a politician. Oh, there's no story there. I got stuck with this, or, there's nothing there. It's not really a story. I had it happen to me just this morning, right? We did a story on a product, a big recall involving Rona, and the Rona spokesperson called me. Mind you, it was after the story came out, but she said to me, "Oh, I don't know what the big story is here." So right away, like, remember, right, people, they're not journalists, right? They're not us. They're PR, and they're great people, most of them, right? Like, they are great people, but they a lot of times they'll want to sell spin, right? And they'll want to avoid controversy. Who wouldn't? It's human nature, right, to want to avoid controversy. So if you give them that wiggle room, they're going to take it. So, that doesn't mean that we don't listen to them. That doesn't mean that we don't hear out their views, but we go firm, right? I'm doing a story on you. Okay. This last point is one that we always forget. I sometimes even forget this. Always ask the person that you're interviewing who else you should talk to. Okay, they may know somebody that didn't come across in any of your Google searches or any of your email checks or anything like that. So always ask them. They may have an opinion on who you should talk to. Okay, how are we doing so far? Any questions from anybody? All good? I don't hear voices, so I'm going to move on. Okay. Conducting the interview. Okay. Small talk never hurt anybody. Okay. Don't whip out your notepad or recorder right away. Take a minute for pleasantries. This is obviously if you're doing it in person, but even over the phone. Hey, how's it going? If you know someone's got a particular liking for football, or if you want to be cheesy and go with the weather, nothing wrong with that, right? Nothing wrong with that. Take a minute for pleasantries, right? What do you think is going to happen if you call someone and say, "Hi, I'm doing a story on you," and start like firing off questions? Right away, the back goes up and you've lost them because their guard goes up, right? Sometimes we want the guards to go up, but you want to kind of ease into it, right? This is a big issue in our newsrooms, and I'm curious to get your advice on it or your suggestions on it. If you're using a digital recording device, you don't have to say anything, and I would advise you not to say anything unless they bring it up. If they do, say you're using it for accuracy purposes. How does everybody feel about that? I mean, I'm not, I have no issue with you telling the subject that you're interviewing or people that you're interviewing that you're recording them. There's nothing wrong with that. But how do we feel about that? I'll just get some comments if you'd like to comment.
I just want to say, I'm pretty sure the very start of our first year, David was like, "You do not record someone unless you're telling them you're recording." So I think that's kind of drilled into us, but I do agree that sometimes it's like you can kind of be a little stealthy about it and there's no harm done, but it's just my
Yeah,
opinion.
and that's a good point, Katrina. Now David's gonna like email me after saying, "What are you telling these people?" But typically, and it's an ethical issue, right? The law, legally, there's no issue, right? Legally, you do not have to tell someone that you're recording them, right? That's what the law says. You don't have to tell someone as long as someone in the room or in the conversation, one of the two people knows they're being recorded, that there's a recording, you're fine legally. So it's not a legal issue, right? It's an ethical question, right? Whether you want to do that. To me, I find just in my experiences, when you tell someone that you're recording them or you give them an opportunity to put up a fight, it's like what I said before about I'm doing a story on you or I'd like to do a story. If you're giving them a choice, they may say, "Well, I really don't want to be recorded." And then you're kind of stuck because then you want to record them to be accurate, but now you got to convince them, right? And that's not the journalism that we want to be doing. The journalism we want to be doing is the questions and asking the right questions and digging deep to get the story, not the sales pitch of why I should record you, right? So
I think that the way that we kind of talked about it a little bit too, with like the way Dave brought it up, is sometimes you can like also just make it obvious that you're going to be recording, like, and start the interview or conversation. And like, like if I was to pull out my phone and a recorder and press a red button and put it down on the table, I think someone would recognize like it's not a secret, like, you know what I mean? And most people, if I say I'm just like, "Oh, I'm just gonna set up the recorder here, but don't worry about it because we're just gonna
yeah,
like have a conversation, like an interview," and most people are okay with that. And I think that also kind of depends sometimes on the relationship that you have with who you're talking with too, because for example, if you were like a beat reporter covering council and you call the mayor like once a week, then the mayor's probably going to expect that you're recording that call when you call them because they know that you're writing stories about stuff and that you have to include a quote from them about like what's going on. So I think that when it comes to that too, like as like as we kind of find our space as like journalists too, like if say Juan was like used to covering like a certain band in Hamilton and like their kind of career, and like they were just used to the fact that every time he called, they like was recording it for his interviews. Like maybe then you just don't say anything, you just do it because for accuracy's sake, like you said, and then also to not disrupt that just like natural flow of conversation. But it would be kind of just relationship based at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of this is relationship based, right? It's like, what kind of a repertoire do you have with the person that you're interviewing? And maybe the middle ground here, everybody, is doing something similar to what Jessica said, where you're telling them, but you're not really asking them, right? Oh, I'm just going to like record because I just want to make sure I'm accurate. And my note taking sometimes is not up to snuff. I'm just going to record, and you start, right?
Or just like, yeah, like have your notebook just be like, I'd rather be able to like pay attention to our conversation, so I'm just gonna set this up here. Like that's what I do sometimes, because I think people would be like, oh, like you actually want to talk to me, like that's nice, like okay, that's fine. Because if it's good to take notes and stuff obviously too while you're doing an interview, but you don't want your head like down like
Of course.
writing the whole time that they're talking.
Yeah, because that could prove to be a bit distracting as well. Let me ask you all this, because I'm assuming a lot of you are going to be doing email interviews or phone interviews. What do you all think about the phone interview? Because now you are not in front of the person. You can effectively record them. I mean, sometimes the recording devices are funny. Sometimes there's like a beep that goes off. And like I've had people like say to me even like, oh, what was that? And then I'd have to say, oh, I'm actually recording this. Right. But what do you all think? Like, do you think we know that we don't need their permission legally, everybody. We know that. But do you think it's in our best interests and it's right to ask them or to let them know over the phone?
I'd say it's just courtesy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well put, Juan. It could be just a common courtesy. I'm going to leave it up to you, what you do. Typically, again, when I'm interviewing someone, even in person, like, I mean, this is going to be, sometimes I really wish we were in a classroom, but I'm going to try to show you over Zoom. This is not going to be great because it's kind of like a prop thing. But what I'll do is, if you see here, this is my phone, also a recording device. Just pretend that this is a notepad. This is what I'll do. I'll have it underneath, turn it on, and then, oh, really? Oh, okay. And you kind of listen and hear them talk. And at the same time, it's being recorded. Sometimes I find, and this is kind of to Jessica's point and Juan's as well, sometimes I find when people know that they're recording you, or that when they know they're being recorded, it's almost like a video camera, right? It's like the back goes up, right? It's like, oh, now I got to watch what I'm saying, which is weird. It's all in your brain, right? It's all mind over matter, because you still got to watch what you're saying when we're taking notes as well, right? But I find that it's just an extra guard that goes up when they know that there's a recording device turned on. So generally what I'll do is avoid mentioning it. If it's in person, I'll typically do what Jessica did, or what Jessica does or has done, which is kind of turn it on and like ask without asking. Like say, I'm just going to have the recording device, but it's off to the side here, just for accuracy purposes, just to make sure that I
can't like super take credit for that, because that's something that Dave like told us, like kind of suggested, like, so it's less awkward, but just something that stuck with me.
No, and it's an excellent suggestion, because it's kind of meets like that halfway point of you're telling them, but you're not really asking them. You're just kind of telling them that, like, this is kind of how it is, and I'm going to record.
I have one like other thing I was gonna say that just made me think of, from what you were just saying about like sometimes if you do tell someone that you're recording too, this I understand this idea of this kind of like they freeze up or whatever, like you're saying, maybe aren't as comfortable talking. But on the other end of the spectrum, you might also have people who they're willing to talk about like A, B, and C, but like there's X, Y, and Z that they can't talk to you on record about. But because you were like honest with them and they're like comfortable talking with you, they'll be like, okay, and by the way, off the record, like blah 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 blah, and then you can get more information that way too. Sometimes having that level of honesty, I think, with people, because it's a respect thing. It's
Yeah.
a, hey, I respect you enough to tell you that I'm recording you while I'm talking to you right now, because I think that anybody might be a little bit upset if, like, if they, obviously an interview is different, but like if you were on the phone with your best friend or something, you're talking to them for half an hour and they call you later, they're like, by the way, I recorded that whole phone call. It's just like a, even after the fact, it's a weird feeling, right? So sometimes honesty is the best policy, and maybe that's just a personal thing, but I found even sometimes people are willing to be a little bit more honest with you, even if they're not willing to go on the record about it, because you told them you're recording them.
And a lot of it is, like you said before, it's relationship thing too, right? I mean, if you're doing an interview that, you know, for example, like, I mean, unless any of you are like have a relationship, like a personal relationship with the mayor, I'm assuming we don't talk to the mayor too often. That's one of those ones where, you know, they get the deal, you know the deal, right? They know they're probably going to be recorded. You know, it's one of those things where you know the relationship's there, and you know that they're trained enough to know that like this is probably going to be recorded. So sometimes it doesn't hurt to let them know. What happens if you do what Jessica did and what David said and what I, like, you know, have sort of been saying to do, and the person says, well, I don't want to be recorded? Then what? Any thoughts?
Sorry, I was about to talk, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to yet. I would like try to reassure them that if it was only for like my own records, like I try to kind of push it one more time, being like, no one is saying this except me when I'm trying to recall what we were talking about. But then if they still were like not down for it, then I would try to be like, okay, well, I'll try to like be taking notes during it, but it will be a distraction. I still try to push for the recording.
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of ass kissing as well, right? You know, you're a really articulate speaker, and I just want to make sure I have everything down exactly as you're saying it, because this is great stuff that you're going to be saying, or this is great stuff that you've said, and I want to make sure I have it down 100% because I'd like to use it. Okay. What happens if, like Katrina said, that doesn't even work? What happens if they're just adamant, say they've had a bad experience with something before, then what do we do?
I would just take notes.
It's all we can do, right? This is the problem sometimes when you open up the recording sort of like can of worms, right? And you kind of like mention it, is you could run into, well, I don't want to be recorded. Now, we're all journalists. We're all, you know, trained and getting trained in note taking. So our notes should suffice in an interview, right? You know, and that has happened to me before, just so you all know, where I did, like I didn't record. I had to do an interview with the police chief of Peel Region about 5 years ago, and he didn't want to be recorded. And I thought that was weird. And he said a lot of controversial stuff. And I included it in my story that he said no to a recording. So you might run into that, is what I'm saying. And if that does happen, then you got to revert to old school and note taking, which there's nothing wrong with that, right? Most of you will be taking notes anyway. So
When you covered that story, like I just find that interesting you say that, but like do you find it hard to like give work like that where you're like, okay, they said some kind of controversial stuff that I'm publishing that they said, but I don't have a recording of it?
yeah, no, I'm totally confident in my note taking. So like I had no problem with it. Like obviously there's, you know, a bit of the wind goes out of the sails because it's like, oh crap, you know. So now if this person wanted to challenge me on it, right, it's basically he said she said with my notes, right? And notes are great. People do not underestimate the validity of notes. They've helped me in even in court. When you take down notes, it is a written document of what's happened. So obviously I'm not an idiot, okay, and neither is a judge. A digital recording is obviously stronger, but notes are valid, and they're extremely valid. So take good notes as well, particularly if you have someone that says, I don't want to be recorded. Okay. But again, I just want to be clear, right? And believe me, Dave's suggestions were awesome, just from everything that you're saying, Jessica. So I don't want to seem like I'm contradicting what he's saying. That's not what I'm doing here. But just know that you're not obligated to tell someone that that you're recording them. And I think that the middle ground is probably just making mention of it and saying, I'm just going to record. As for over the phone, it's up to you how you want to do it. I can tell you from my own experience, I don't tell someone that I'm recording them when it's over the phone. I turn the device on and I just go from there. That's when I do record. Sometimes I don't record phone interviews. So
I think at one point, one of our instructors told us that we don't have to tell them that we're recording, like, and ask permission. We just have to say, oh, 1 second, I'm turning on my device or something. And it's kind of like letting them know, but you're not really asking for permission, so they don't think twice about it. But
yeah,
I had a question about, I was listening to like Canada Land this week, and they did an interview with like a journalist in the States, and she said, I want this to be what's it called? Like when it's anonymous. Like what's it
anonymous,
called?
not attributed.
Oh, off the record. Sorry, I was thinking off the table. She like asked them to be off the record, and they said no. And then she went through with the interview, and then they just played it on the podcast. Like, is it if they? Sorry, I think I kind of answered my own question. Never mind. I was gonna say, like, do you have to agree, like, to be off the record for it to be off the record? Like, can you just say no and like, yeah.
So a lot of the fun in interviewing and just in journalism in general is, there's what profs and instructors like myself will tell you what's legal and what's right and what's wrong, but you also have to think about your relationship with the person, right? If I do an interview with a police officer, I'm just using a cop as an example, and he tells me I'm doing an interview on a unsolved murder, and he says to me, we're closing in on a suspect and we're probably going to arrest him sometime this evening. We've been trailing him for 6 months, and the arrest is going to happen this evening, but we got to be careful when we go into his house because he's got a wife and 3 kids. Oh, but that stuff's off the record. Okay. Legally, you can use that. Okay. Because you didn't agree to go off the record with him. And he's just telling you that as a matter of fact after the fact. So it's after your note taking. Okay. So you can use that. Now, for relationship purposes, for a common decency, do you want to use that? I don't know. Right. It's really got to be a big story that's going to, make or break your career, but you have to decide, do you want to burn? Because you will burn that relationship, right? If you do that. So you have to ask yourself if that's something you want to do. Generally, when someone goes off the record, there's some follow-up questions that you can ask, right? Because off the record could mean, I bet you, if I asked I think there's 15 of us on now, maybe less. If I asked 15 of you what off the record means, I bet you will have 15 different answers of what off the record is. So someone might decide to go off the record with you. You can follow up with them and say, what does that mean? Can I use this information but not attribute it to you? Is that what you mean? Like, can I use it and not attribute it to you? Their answers might be, no, you can't. They might say, I'm giving you this information. You can't say that you got it from me. I'm not your source, but you can ask someone else about it. And if they're willing to go on the record, that works too. Okay, so off the record could mean a lot of different things. Generally, with the police contacts that I've had, off the record, generally, not all the time, means use it, but don't attribute it to me. Okay? But you have to be clear with that with your subject. Okay? So, yes, I mean, generally, if someone says something is off the record, you really have to clarify with them what that means. Is everybody clear on that? I know that kind of sounds like an ambiguous answer, but, or are we not clear? Ask questions if you're not clear. We're all kind of good. Okay.
Makes sense.
It's easy for me to tell you, just tell your whoever you're interviewing, like don't go off the record with me. But I mean, sometimes you get great stuff off the record, so you have to decide. You have to ask them what off the record means. So, like if this is just a make believe exercise now, but if we're talking today, right? and we're just having this class, and I say to you, off the record, everybody, the college is going to be closing tomorrow for the school year because of COVID, and there's going to be no classes. Like, what do you think that means? If you're interviewing me, what do you think that means?
That information is classified.
I think you said classified, right? One, you kind of cut out at the end.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So that's, and what Juan said is probably right, that I don't want this published. Okay. But everybody, we're journalists, right? If you have a question, ask it, right? Follow up, say, well, can I use that? Like, can we report that, but just not from you? Okay. Don't be afraid, right? That actually goes to my next point, right? If you don't understand something, ask for clarification. The only stupid question is the one you don't ask. Okay. The last thing you want to go ahead.
Sorry, if you're interviewing somebody and you like, so they decide to go off their record and you agree to that, and they're like, okay, you can use this information, but not from me. Like, you didn't hear it from me, kind of thing. Like, how would you go about putting it in, like, whatever,
In your story or
like
in
a written story, like around quotes from them, but like you can, like, it's, I feel like it would be really obvious that it's from them if you have other quotes from them.
Again, that's a decision that you have to make with regards to if someone's going to look at it and reveal, or it's going to be obvious that it's them, right? Maybe you have to craft your story in a way that, you know, you've quoted them. I mean, if you have multiple people quoted in a story and then you say a well-placed source said, I mean, it's up to the reader to decide, or to people to decide who, whether it's them or not, right? But when you're going off the record, or when someone goes off the record and says you can use this but don't attribute it to me, that's all you're doing as a journalist, right? Whether someone can look at it and say, oh, it's got to be him, that's not for you to decide, right? You're doing your job as a journalist by saying, I'm going to use this quote from you, and I'm going to use this information, and I'm going to say it's not, like, you know, I'm not naming the person, and that's all you can do. So I would absolutely use it. But again, you also have to look at what the newsroom, like the, you know, what the policy of the newsroom is. For example, in our investigative assignment, right, this one that you got coming, it's got to be 3 named sources. I think that's what it says in the assignment outline, 3 named sources. So you know, unless it's something really, really compelling, which I'm always more than willing to listen to, you can't use like an anonymous source, you know, but that's up for discussion always, and you can always talk to me about that. So generally speaking, I would use that information. I'm not sure who asked the question. That's why I'm not naming the person, but generally I would use that information. Sorry, who was it?
Okay. Jarrett.
Oh, okay, Jared, thanks. Does that answer your question though?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Just another point, like, show compassion, right? There's a term like in journalism, like comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, right? You know, always show compassion when someone's talking. There's been times, people, I'm telling you, like, I could not agree less with what's coming out of someone's mouth, or could not disagree more with what's coming out of someone's mouth, but they'll never see it in my face, right? Show compassion, right? Kind of look at them and, you know, be like, oh, really? Like, you know, why do you think that? Like, you know, like, why do you think that, like, you know, something that's so preposterous, like, why do you think that's the case? Never let them see, right? Because if they see that you're not agreeing with them, you know, you'll lose it. There's ways to disagree with people and just say, and we'll talk about that in a second, but always show compassion, right?
I always say, okay, awesome, great, no matter what the person said. And sometimes it's not awesome and great. And I feel like really bad that I can't stop doing it.
No, don't feel bad. I mean, if it's going to get you some more information, then you gotta do what you gotta do, right? And the last thing you want to be doing is saying, well, you know, why the hell would you say that? Or, you know, like, because then obviously you know what's going to happen, right? You're going to lose them. So yeah, just always keep that compassion going. Just a quick story before we go into speaking of questions here, but a couple of years ago, this is just a story about, like, kind of like, you know, what happens sometimes in an interview, but I was assigned the story where there was a school trip, and it was a school trip, and it was a bunch of like elementary school kids, and they were going to this farm out in Caledon, and the driver was on the highway, and he hit a really big pothole in the highway, and the bus kind of jerked down and then jerked up really quick to the point where actually some students on the bus went up and hit their heads on the top of the bus. One kid, a 5-year-old, actually died. He hit his head so hard that he passed away. And so we had the story up that day. So the next day, they kind of assigned me to see if I can talk to the family and get some stuff from the family. So I went to the family's home, kind of told them who I was, and it was the aunt of the kid that answered the door because they had a bunch of people over. And she said, well, the family, the mom and dad they're not ready to talk right now, but if you want to come in, I'll give you some information about him. And so she gave me some information, really good information, by the way, on him. And I was just finishing up. And again, when she was telling me this, I mean, it was genuine, just heartbreak, right? Like when she was telling me all this stuff. So I was packing up and kind of getting ready to leave. And I heard someone say, excuse me. And it was the dad. And he was like kind of upstairs and coming down the stairs. And he kind of like was just coming over to me, right? And like, you always try to like keep your composure, right? But he came over to me and like he was like kind of like maybe 2 feet away from me, and I just said, look, like sir, I'd like to ask you. And before I even got that, I'd like to ask you some questions. I swear, like on journalism, like he put his arm or his hand on my arm, and he looked right at me, like right in my face, and he just goes, I really miss him. I just really miss him. And I was trying to hold it in, like I could feel the tears coming up, and I was trying to hold it, and I just blinked, and boom, they all came down, right? So I just like started bawling my eyes out. And so like sometimes you can't always keep your composure, right? And we're human, and sometimes you got to let the emotion show. In that case, I couldn't hold it, right? I couldn't hold it. He was so close to me, and it was just like it was a day later, and like those words, like they're chiseled in my brain, right? When he says, "I really miss him." So it was just a tough story. But, on the flip side of that, unfortunately, he took me up to his room. He showed me all these drawings that he did, and we got a great picture of him, and we ran it big in the newspaper and online. And it was a tribute piece to, a 5-year-old that was like, the light of everybody's eyes. So tough story to write. But sometimes you're not going to be able to hold your composure with these interviews, and it's going to be tough. But do your best, right, to try to hold it in, even if you don't agree with what someone's saying. Speaking of questions, right? Open-ended. Okay. What's an open-ended question? Help me out.
You can't answer it with a yes or no.
Exactly. I think Karis was the first one that got in there. You can't answer it yes or no, right? Typically, why, how, what, right? A question that answers or asks those questions. It invites your sources to roam freely. Closed-ended, okay? Did you graduate from Mohawk? Obviously, we have to ask those. Like, there's no such thing as, don't ask any closed-ended questions. Sometimes you have to for housekeeping and just to get some verification. And sometimes you got to ask closed-ended questions. Narrowing, if anybody's ever heard of narrowing, okay, can you give me an example of that? Okay, great for background. Okay, when somebody tells you, we have all kinds of issues in this workplace. Really, what can you give me an example? Okay, you'll get these awesome stories. Typically, especially with these investigative assignments, I found in years past, my students have used one of those questions, like, can you give me an example of that? And they would use the answer to that as the lead to their story, where they'll kind of like just go into a story from one of their sources and then kind of hit them with maybe the 5th paragraph saying this is an issue at Mohawk or this is an issue in this community, but starting off with like a cool story. Okay. The idiot approach, nothing wrong with that. Okay, that's my approach sometimes. This gets you great stuff, everybody. If you don't get anything from walking away from this like slideshow, take this with you. That last point there gets you like wicked answers. Okay. I know this is going to seem like a stupid question, and ask your question. You'll get them to talk for like, to the point where you're going to have to tell them to shut up about something, right? And if you can do that in an interview, you've succeeded. If what you're doing in the interview is saying, you know what, I'm running out of time here, we got to go, then that's a good thing because you're getting a lot from them. So, again, I do that all the time. This is going to seem like a stupid question, but okay. It'll get you all kinds of answers. And why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that'll get you some good answers?
I feel like people enjoy reassuring others. And so it's like if they assume that you're feeling a little bit like, oh, like reserved, like, oh, this isn't going to be a great question, then they're feeling like more inclined to help you out.
Exactly. Well put, Trina. It gives them an opportunity to control the interview a bit, right? And we all want that, right? We all want like control in our conversations, in our day-to-day interactions with people. And that's an opportunity for them to say, oh, I can school him or her. Here's an opportunity to open up. And they don't realize that they're probably opening up and telling you maybe sometimes things that they shouldn't be. But they're telling you some good information. So neat little approach to use. Probably the most important, leading questions, okay? Leading questions are dangerous, but they're important. So I would always say reserve them for the end. Because, you know, for example, you know, again, we keep coming back to these counselor expense stories, but, you know, if you want to ask a counselor about a certain amount that they spent on their expenses, I would save that big question more for the end of the interview. Because you might piss them off, it might bother them, okay? And better that you get some information as opposed to going with that as your first question and right away putting them up on guard and, you know, they don't want to answer anything, right? So always make sure that you kind of save those for the end. Everybody understand that? Do we understand what leading questions are? Kind of like I get some people saying like kind of like with a wishy-washy kind of look. It's okay. That's good. I'm glad that like if you're not clear, we'll talk about it. But it's kind of a question that directs the interviewee in a certain direction, right? For example, what are your concerns for students who are fearing for their safety and afraid to walk in the wooded areas, right? You're asking a question that's kind of forcing the person. Like this was a question that one of my students asked to the head of security at Mohawk a couple of years ago. But you're asking them to comment on something that they don't really know is true, but you're kind of telling them it's true. Like people are afraid, right? Someone could come and can respond to that saying, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never had one complaint of someone being afraid to walk in the woods. So you see, like even the way I answered that, even it's like their guard goes up, right? And if you start off with those types of questions, their guard's going to be up for the whole interview, and you're going to get a bunch of, you know, like the like my 5-year-old when he's upset, right? Like, yep, nope, yep, right? He's actually 13 years old, but he reminds me of a 5-year-old when he's upset. But you know what I mean? Like that's what you'll get. You'll get like very short and curt answers. So save those for the end, right? They're kind of like the ones that send someone into a certain direction, right? You know, I had students, for example, in years past do, and this is a great one to do if you want to pursue it, if any of you are looking for ideas, but parking rates at college, right? Mohawk compared to other colleges. Some of the questions that you have to ask in that kind of a story is why are the rates at Mohawk so much higher than Sheridan, Humber, Centennial? That's something
Also, like a parking thing. I know even one of our professors, Marie, in one of the last semesters that we had her, she couldn't even get a parking pass at school because they were sold out, and she's like a part-time professor. So she was paying like every time she came to teach at the college, she was paying for parking like during the day in the parking lot because they only sell like X amount at whatever rate too, because the parking lot can only be so full. But then on top of that, there's all the people who come and park like day parking. So you could have a parking pass and there's no parking spots even because of the day parkers too. So it's just there's a lot of angles to parking.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of those things where if you're interviewing, say the security or, you know, someone who is in charge of parking, that's a question that you want to save for the end, right? Which is why are so many people having trouble getting parking passes, right? And it could even be worded in that way, right? But that's one that you maybe, you know, you don't even necessarily have to say it for like the last question, but towards the end of the interview, you might want to ask that one because that one might be one that puts someone up on edge. Okay. Couple of what ifs here. What if you can't get a hold of the person you're looking for?
Drop them.
Drop them. You might have to. You might not have a choice. But keep trying. Keep trying with them. There's nothing wrong with, leaving 3 or 4 messages and, a couple, 3, 4 emails. Don't think that you're going to get, charged with stalking them or, someone's going to file a harassment complaint against you. If you call them 200 times in a day, maybe, but all you're showing them is that you want to talk to them, right? But what if you can't get a hold of the person? Seems like an obvious one, but plan B, right? Always have a plan B. Always have someone else that you're willing to, that you can interview or that you can talk to. Something that is a bit of a lost start, always try to call the person's office number, even if you know they're away. Why do I say that? Why would I do that? You're saying to me, Louis, what? That's like just sounds stupid. Like if I know they're away, why am I going to call their office number?
Maybe their secretary will spill the beans.
That could happen. And then if the secretary answers, what can you say?
Could I leave a message?
Can I leave a message? Think of the world that we're living in right now, Juan. Is there a way I can like maybe email him or her, like they can see it on their phone? Is there a number I can call them at? Maybe another number, an additional number. Worst thing that you get is piss off. I'm not giving you that information. And you move on, right? But there's nothing wrong with getting someone else and saying, hey, is there a way I can get a hold of them? Maybe you might not have their email and that secretary or that assistant can give you the email, right? Another reason to call the office number. Nobody will be in the office, but guess what? You might have something on their voicemail that says, if you need to get a hold of me, you can reach me on my mobile at bum, 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 bum. And now you got their cell phone number, okay? Which has happened before with me. So there's options. I see some students laughing, and it can't be because I'm not saying anything funny. It's got to be something in the chat. It must be. I can't wait to see this chat when I get off of the slideshow. But okay, so we got that one dealt with. What if the subject only wants their first name used or no name at all? What do we do then?
I was under the impression that we were allowed to sometimes like change a name in print at least. Not change, but like if they wanted to appear a certain way, they could.
It depends on, again, on the newsroom policy and what they want to do. Some places, like for example, we did a story last year where we interviewed a victim of human sex trafficking. And obviously she wasn't comfortable using her name, but we thought that she was a good enough, a very good source to use with a lot of information. So we went and used it, but we didn't give her a make-believe name. We just said who preferred not to be named, right? So for this assignment, you'll want to have their first and last name. You'll need to have their first and last name. Again, nothing wrong with a little bit of sucking up, right? What you just said was really good. And I'd like to use your first and last name. You can even just say it's for an assignment. It's not going to be published anywhere. There's nothing wrong with saying that either, right? To help you out a little bit on this assignment. So what happens if the person hangs up on you? Says they don't want to talk? What do we say then?
Sorry, that happened to someone in our class, and she. I want her to tell the story. Taryn, please tell the story.
No, like I was calling Starbucks And like I was doing a listicle on like their top holiday drinks, and then I basically asked them what their most popular one was, and she went and asked the employee, but she didn't mute herself. So then they're like, should we just hang up on her? And then they said yeah, and they all just started laughing and they hung up on me. It was
Oh
pretty
my God.
sad.
Jeez.
Savage.
So what did you do? Like, what did you do when that happened?
I called a different Starbucks, but then I went to Twitter and I tweeted at Starbucks. I was like, that was horrible customer service. And then they gave me $10 for a coffee.
Damn, that's crazy. Well, there's a lot of things to do. I just stopped sharing now, so I'm looking at our chat. This should be fun. Oh, not good. Not good. Okay, so, oh boy, I'm gonna really have to revisit this, like keeping the chat open. I'll review that later. There's a few things that can happen. Thanks for sharing that, Taryn. That was like a really interesting story. But there's a few things that can happen, right, when someone hangs up on you or doesn't want to talk. The first thing, if they don't want to talk, what do we always ask? We're journalists. What do we say? I don't want to talk to you. What's the follow-up question?
Why?
Why? Right? Ask why. They may just hang up on you anyway. They may tell you because my work doesn't want me to speak to you. Okay. All of a sudden now you got something that's like pretty interesting, right? Why? Why doesn't your work want you to talk to the media? So always ask why. Okay. Again, this was only a couple of years ago. I got assigned a story about the Mississauga Board of Trade. The head of their Board of Trade. He was like in charge. He was let go. Let go for they call it like financial disparities, right? And he was actually let go from the Board of Trade, but this wasn't made public yet. So they assigned me to do it. We got some information from sources and stuff, and I had information and I had a story that I was working on. And he had been let go about, I think, 2 weeks before I wrote this, or 3 weeks actually, before I wrote the story as I was writing it. So it's kind of a big story. Board of Trade, you all know how big they are in certain communities. So, and the head of the company or the Board of Trade getting let go for financial irregularities was kind of big. So I put together a story and I decided to call his house because I couldn't get a hold of him, obviously at the office because he wasn't there anymore. And his wife answered. And I said, hi, it's Louis, and at the time with the Mississauga News. I said, I'm doing a story on this, and I'm just wondering if he's home. And she said, oh, he's at work. And I said, oh, like, I said, did he get like another job? And she said, no, like he's at the Board of Trade. So this genius didn't tell his wife that he got fired from his job. And she found out from me, right? So that earned me the nickname Home Wrecker in the newsroom for like a couple of months.
Louis got the tea.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so it was interesting, right? So I told her and I said, we're doing a story. He got let go, this, that. So she was like, you know, when you're talking to someone and you can hear them like tearing up on the phone. And that's what happened. And, but again, my point is I was taking notes as she was saying stuff, right? And he called me back about 20 minutes later after he got home from work. And he gave me an earful, most of which I can't repeat. But yeah, so that's how that goes. But my point is, you know, when someone's about to hang up on you, ask why and take notes. You can still take notes, right? You know, and you can even put in your story, when we asked this question, they hung up. If it happened, there's nothing wrong with telling the truth. Okay. I think that's all I got for now. How are we doing, everybody? Like, does anybody have any questions about the major assignment? I think I put some slides in there last week about what you could pursue. as a major assignment? Anybody have any thoughts? Anybody have any questions?
No, I was just gonna say the discussion over dinner between those two must have been interesting, right?
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm slowly looking. I'm like I have to go through the chat fully in that after, but yeah, it's a pandemic. I gotta let you all have a little fun, right? Anybody? How about any questions with regards to the assignment? How are we doing? We're still a ways out, but just remember it creeps up quick. Okay. But how are we doing? Are we kind of getting an idea of what we'd like to work on? You can be honest if you're not.
I was wondering, you know what, now that I'm speaking, I'm like, maybe it's a stupid question, but anyways, I'll just ask it anyways.
Yeah.
Basically what I was like thinking of doing, well, okay, honestly, I had like two stories in my head. One was there's like a really big like rumor around Waterdown that we're one of the top I don't know how to word this. Okay. We're one of the top towns for swingers.
Mhm.
And I was gonna do like something along the lines for that, but then I was like, I don't even know I would start with that. And another idea that I had was Value Village, their donation policy with linked with the Canadian, I think it's the Canadian Red Cross at the moment. Maybe I'm wrong. Is very iffy. I know because I used to work there, and I was wondering if maybe I could expand on something like that.
On Value Villages, like what? Like their donation with? I didn't catch the last part.
So they essentially what they do is for every like pound of clothing they weigh and um they give the, I think it's the Red Cross, I think I'm wrong though, or blood services a certain amount of money. And it's never a specific like they don't tell you how much it is because it's like kept really really secret, especially when I worked there. And I was gonna like go more into depth of why is it kept so secret, you know what I mean?
So the one thing I would say with both of those suggestions is be careful with the, like, I'm sure that there's a good story with the Value Village, but be careful with private companies, right? Because they do not have to tell you anything, right? They're not required to. There's nothing that's forcing them to tell you anything. So you may hit a lot of brick walls. It sounds like you might have a bit of an in there, but you still might hit brick walls in terms of getting people to go on the record with it. The swingers sounds interesting. And I think it's something that you probably could get a little bit more luck with in terms of getting people to talk freely and openly about it, right? But just remember, you need data and numbers, right, in your investigative story. So if you are going to do something like that, because that does sound interesting, if you are going to do something like that, you just have to back it up with maybe some numbers on, you know, maybe some sites that have swingers on them that you can maybe bring those numbers out. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, that one sounds like it's a little bit more of an open. It's weird. Like I'm between the two, I'm picking the swinger story as being like more openly accessible, but but I think you'd get more luck with that one. If I had to pick the two, like just based on just what you've said, if I had to pick, I would go with that one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And having said that, you know, if you change your mind, you change your mind, you can do something else. So, Katrina, you look like you want to say something. Maybe not. No.
Yeah, I do actually. Sorry,
Okay.
I was just like,
You kind of had your hand. So.
Yeah. So like what's your experience with like collecting like data regarding like high schools or like public schools? Are those like off limits?
Generally it depends on what you are looking for. Like if it is in terms of, you know, how many teachers were disciplined, or, you know, like what kind of information are you looking to get?
Like I'm just thinking about like information regarding students, like with like reasons for suspension or like expulsion, like rates like that. I was just thinking like I don't know. I know some high schools in Burlington have some pretty, I wouldn't say severe drug problems, but I mean, I went to a high school in Burlington. I know there's a lot circulating, and I was just wondering if I was like, I don't know, like if I was going to look at like number of suspensions like due to like drug possession on school property? Like, is that even information you could obtain or no?
You might be able to do that through a freedom of information request. I don't think that's something they would have like readily available. It might be one of those ones where you might have to look at the community that the school is in and maybe go to the police with the drug problem, if there's a drug problem, the drug issue in that community. That might be a route best taken by going to the police first, maybe like Halton, like if you're doing it on the Burlington school or Burlington area school, going to the appropriate police force and saying, I'm just looking for how many incidents there's been at this school and see what you get out of that. Suspensions, kids suspended. I'd love to tell you that that's obtainable, but probably by the time this semester's over, probably not.
Yeah.
So, you might be able to get the number of suspensions in general issued at a school,
Yeah.
but not drug related.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else? We all good? Kara's like playing peekaboo. She's like up and down, up and down.
I had tears in my eyes.
From the riveting conversation to my right, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, it just got me. I don't know.
Dangerous what chat can do sometimes. So are we all good for now? Yes? Any questions you feel like the group might want to hear about the investigative assignment, or are we okay? Okay.
Louis, will we be meeting next week?
No, so that's good, because I was just going to go into next steps. Taryn, before I do that though, not to call you out, Jessica, it looked like you maybe wanted to ask something, or was it just me misreading it?
I forgot my question because I have the attention span of a peanut today. So unfortunately, I have nothing for you.
Okay. Well, if you remember it, obviously you can email me, and we'll get it dealt with. But after this Zoom meeting, the next time I'll be seeing you is with your individual Zoom meetings when it is time to work on your assignment, and we're going to call them coaching time periods, where like I'll be seeing you individually to kind of work on your assignments. You don't have to meet with me, okay? Don't think that it's obligated, but I am going to set aside probably, I haven't decided how much yet, but probably like 10 to 15 minutes, maybe even 20-minute time slots over the course of say like 2 weeks, 2 classes. But that'll be after reading week and such, and we'll deal with that then. But that'll be the next time I see you if you decide to take me up on that meeting. Don't think you have to wait until then, everybody. If you feel like you want to have a Zoom meeting with me one-on-one before that, just let me know, right? Some of you have already, and I think I can speak for the people that I've spoken to already individually on Zoom. I was good with it, right? Like I think, you reached out, then we had something set up for either later that day or the next day, right? So I'm good with that too. If you want to do that, do not be afraid to reach out, okay? I think that's all I got for now. Have an awesome reading week, everybody. We're getting there. We're almost done. And like I said, feel free to reach out via email or if you want to have a Zoom meeting or anything like that. Okay, y'all? All right, good chats. Keep the chat going if you want through another messaging service, I guess. And have a good reading week. We'll talk soon. I'll be in touch.